the city of Pasadena, they asked me, so they're doing a feature on a lot of the entrepreneurs and businesses in the area. They've got a website called Future Yourself Here. And Michelle, she's not here today, but she's usually here from the city. And they did a spotlight on my business, and it goes out today. So go to futureyourselfhere.com, and they're doing some spotlights on local businesses, so that's great. And I see Andy in the back here. Andy, raise your hand. This is the guy who started this whole thing. He had a vision 7 years ago, something like that, and wanted to bring the community together. I found out about it, met Andy, and just got excited. And so very grateful to have you starting this thing. Give it. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sam. We met a year ago or so and talked a little bit about emotional intelligence. I've been hearing about emotional intelligence for a long time. A lot of our speakers, when they're up here, they'll talk about their emotional intelligence and what levels it is. And every time I try and find out what emotional intelligence it is, I get more confused. So I think as you balance your IQ and EQ, if my IQ is down here, I hope my EQ is up here. But Dr. Sam, he started at Fuller as a psychologist. One of our speakers in the past actually. That's how I got to know him as a speaker, is because he used Dr. Sam. And so he's going to teach us about emotional intelligence, what it's like to be a leader, some of the pitfalls that happen, all the good things about emotional intelligence. Yes, thank you. He has 2 books that are for sale, I'm guessing on Amazon. So if you can read these, the titles here, that's them. The 3 Dimensionals of Emotions and Follow the Yellow Brick Road. So if you like the presentation, I encourage you to support and purchase those books. There's an audio version as well. So welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much. T is purple. That should make sense by the end of my talk. So anyway, I'm going to be fighting the sun here. Stand right there. Okay, there you go. I'm not blind now. Just as there's 3 dimensions of the physical world, height, width, and depth, there are 3 dimensions of the interpersonal world: power, heart, and knowing, or as we like to call it these days, mindfulness. And to the degree and the ability that we can move through those 3 dimensions, the quality of how we move through those 3 dimensions will determine how good of a leader we are, how good of a partner we are, how good of a parent we are, and in how good of a person we are. Because emotional intelligence crosses through all of those functions and capacities. Now, I'm going to start by telling you what I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about emotional intelligence. Sorry. If we have time in the question and Q&A, you can ask it. Daniel Goleman is the gold standard for communicating the idea of emotional intelligence to the business world. We're not going to talk about him. We're not going to talk about the hundreds of studies that show high emotional intelligence correlation with high performance and success. I'm going to hardly talk about the interpersonal triangle, the model that I've been working on for almost 4 decades, since I was 10 years old. That was a joke. You don't do math very well, or that wasn't funny. One of the two. I have been working on this model for almost 4 years, and it's the basis of the 3 dimensions. And it's the foundation of the 2 books that I've written. And I'm only going to refer to it very casually. I'm not going to tell you about the origins of the 3-dimensional model. I'm not going to talk about Karen Horney, who talked about the 3 ways we move in the interpersonal world. I'm not going to talk about Bion and the ways we connect to the world. I'm not going to talk about Elias Porter, about how the 3 ways we are emotionally, relationally motivated. I'm not going to talk about how animals protect themselves, whether you're the CEO of a Fortune 100 company or the rat that's living in your basement, which sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the 2. But whether we protect ourselves either through fight, flight, or freeze and appease. I'm not going to talk about the empirical studies that back up the model. And I'm not even going to talk about much about the archetypes that I found in the Wizard of Oz mythology. I don't consider it a children's story. It's an American mythology about how Dorothy's journey was to integrate her power side through the lion, her heart side through the Tin Man, and her knowing side through her scarecrow. And spoiler alert, she integrates them at the end. But what I am going to talk about is this, the relationship circle or the relationship wheel. And it's the easiest way and the shortest amount of time for me to introduce you to this model and the three dimensions. This is available to you for free on my book website, which I'll give you the link for, and it's also on the advertisement that you got from the meetup advertisement. I color code them. The three primary colors represent the three primary ways we move, connect, are motivated, and the ways we behave in the world. And they can either be positive, above the line, or negative, below the line. We'll start with red. Red is the power dimension. Its psychological orientation is around the self. The self can be singular, first person singular, I want to beat you in tennis, or I want to beat you to a contract. Or it could be plural. My Philadelphia Eagles can take on the New England Patriots, which they did 2 Super Bowls ago, just for the record. So, thank you, all the Eagle fans in the room. It has to do with competition. Our economic system of the free enterprise is based on red. It's about fighting. It's about power. It's about confidence. It's about telling the truth. It's about keeping good boundaries. It's about fight. It's about assertiveness. In its negative form, it has to do with arrogance. It has to do with being a bully. It has to do with being us and them to an extreme where it's hurtful. Are there any white nationalists in the room? That surprises me. In Pasadena, you would think there'd be a few. This is where white nationalists live, us versus them. And it's based on the amygdala. The amygdala, anybody know what the amygdala is? It's that little part of our brain right in the emotional limbic system that has to do with fear, anxiety, and anger. And it's a fear of the stranger is one of our most common fears. And folks who live here live in the us versus them state of mind all the time. All right, let's talk about blue. Blue is the color designated to the heart dimension. Where the orientation in the red is about the self, the orientation in the blue is about the other. I'm reading a book now called Social, and it's talking about how much our brain is wired for us to be social. We, except for bees and ants, we're probably the most social creatures on earth. And so we have this, in fact, our whole brain is aligned to work together. The blue has to do with belonging. It has to do with working together, collaborating. Where red is divergent, blue is convergent. You come together. You work together. You love each other. You get up in the middle of the night for a sick child. It's that kind of piece. It has to do with the big E word. Anybody know what the big E word is? Empathy. That capacity that we have to understand what someone else might be feeling is a very important part of us being Homo sapiens. It helps us respect one another. In its negative form, it has to do with kind of a dependency, a weakness. It has to do with low self-esteem, feeling inferior, giving other people power. Are there any codependents in the room? Yes. And the rest of you, half of you are lying. It has to do with being enmeshed, where you confuse yourself with somebody else. You keep poor boundaries. You don't know when to end meetings, etc. You get easily hurt and things like that. The red, the clinical aspect of red is narcissism, the N word. right? In organizations, I call it the N-word because you're not supposed to talk about your boss being a narcissist. But there are a few of them out there. Where this is more about depression, where you actually feel blue, right? Let's talk about yellow. This is the last, but certainly not the least, of the dimensions. Where self is about, red is about the self, and blue is about the other. Yellow is about neither. It's that capacity in the human being to know things that's disconnected or detached from either the self or the other. And if you're hearing a little hint of Buddhism in that, you're right, because he's one of the first people to really bring that out to our own consciousness. It's that capacity that we have to step out. It's the scientific part of us where we can look and observe at things in a somewhat neutral way. It has to do with self-control. It has to do with being impartial. It has to do with the capacity to hold complex and conflicting things in your mind without getting whacked out by it. And by the way, one of the studies are showing more and more, one of the key aspects of successful leaders is resilience. And resilience shows up in the yellow. It's that capacity to hold conflict and complexity. And we know a lot of people who can't do that very well. So the negative version of that has to do with detachment. It's like you detach too much. I have a clinical practice, and I also do organizational consulting. And I had a client one time say to me, he goes, healthy moving away or healthy yellow is like going up the side of the hill and looking into the valley. And unhealthy yellow is like going into another valley. It's where you get completely... Are there any people here who aren't here today? That would be the yellow. Some of you women were married to someone like this, weren't you, at one time? Yes. So these are the three dimensions. Now, you might be asking yourself at this point, what in the world does this have to do with emotional intelligence? If you would give me one moment, I like to do a thought experiment or illustration with you. If you feel comfortable, could you please close your eyes? And if you don't, no problem. I want you to imagine hitting a ball in the sweet spot. If you like tennis, imagine hitting the tennis ball in the sweet spot of your racket. If you like golf, hitting the sweet spot of the golf ball in your driver. And if you have a bat, hitting a baseball or a softball in the sweet spot, what does that feel like, hitting the ball in the sweet spot? What does it viscerally feel like when you do that in your mind's eye? And what is the imagined effect of doing that? Okay, come on back. Probably some of you don't want to come back. Because how often do you get to hit an ace except in your mind? Anyway, tell me, what did it feel like? Felt great. How else? Anybody else? How else did it feel? Success. Huh? You get a home run, right? It activates us. Yes?
Energy matching energy.
There you go. Nice. Energy matching energy. And what was the effect in your mind's eye?
No vibration, like there's no side effect.
Oh.
Every bit of energy goes into moving the ball forward.
Are you a physicist or are you a...
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody else. Yes?
Similar to that, it's like when you hit a ball in the sweet spot, you feel it, but you don't feel it. There's a lot that you don't feel. And
The energy is all used for the purpose, and probably it's fairly effective, isn't it? The ball goes where you kind of want it to. At least there's a much better chance. Well, that's in my mind, what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is the dynamic interaction of the positive aspects of all three dimensions. And that would be weighted according to the context. And if that's important, we can talk about it later, but I'm conscious of time. It's the dynamic interaction of all of the positive aspects of all three dimensions. And that's where the sweet spot is. If you can almost imagine that this here is the sweet spot. And when you hit that relational ball here, you're going to use the least amount of energy. It's going to feel really good. Those of you who have one of those good hair days and you're just firing on all 3 cylinders and you just say the right thing at the right time, it feels good, doesn't it? I use the word tovei. When God created the heavens and the earth, and it was, the word is tovei. It's good. It's good when we hit that sweet spot. And it tends to be very effective. If you can imagine some of the best person you've ever worked for, I'm willing to bet that this person, I'm going to bet that she was very confident, wasn't afraid to tell you the truth, was clear, but at the same time was very respectful, empathic, attuned, and connecting with you, and was interested in hearing what you had to say, while at the same time had self-control and could handle complexity and was resilient. All 3 firing at the same time. All right, got that? In my mind, that's what emotional intelligence is. We'll talk later about what Goleman thinks it is. Now, this is very complex. What if you don't have all 3 in dynamic balance? Probably the only person in the room who's going to get this is the physicist. If you don't have dynamic balance, you know what you have? Imbalance. Did you get that concept? This is what I imagine. This is what I see as imbalance. If you have any anxiety, fear, immobility, insecurity, stuckness, or aversion to any one movement, at any time, in any situation, you'll overuse one of the other ones. And Elias Porter said something that's brilliant. An overused strength becomes a weakness. You're confident, overused, you're proud, you're arrogant, right? You're deferential, you're a doormat, if you get that idea. If you have anxiety in any one movement that locks that movement up, doesn't make that movement accessible to you, or you're not comfortable doing it, you will then get thrown out of balance, just like a tripod gets thrown out of balance when you lower one of the legs. So let's give an example. Let's say they're a president of the PTA, or maybe the president of the USA. If this person has a really hard time admitting they're wrong, they don't know how to depend on other people, they're not very good at empathy, and at the same time have really poor impulse control, that they can't handle complexity. Why are you laughing? They're going to go over to the red, and the red's going to become negative. Because once you're out of balance, you get thrown into the negative, and this person's going to blame other people. They're going to take credit for anything goes right. They're going to blame everyone for what goes wrong. They're going to be angry. They will at times have temper tantrums. They will be very selfish and egotistical. And we could go through and do, okay, what if they don't have this, and what if they don't have that? I'm going to give you an example later on of myself, but that's how this works. So we lose we get thrown out of imbalance. There's 2 types of imbalance I want to just quickly give to you. One is what I call the non-aroused imbalance. This model is a behavior model. It's not a personality model. But our personality dictates quite a bit how we behave. And there are people who have a certain proclivity. So they're not aroused. They just tend to be that way. Anyone take the ITI? That was the test that you could have taken. Just one person. You can take the ITI for free. You can give it to your entire staff. Give it to your family. Give it to the dog if you want. It's free. And I already know what your color is, right? It was blue, right? Do you mind me telling this to people? Okay. Should I tell the other dirty secrets you told me? No. She's blue. So her non-aroused position is a person who's very sensitive to other people, cares about other people. That's kind of the non-aroused imbalance that we all have in this room. Then there is the aroused imbalance. This is the imbalance when that idiot cuts you off in the freeway. Or your employee shows up late and they didn't do the work they were supposed to do. I want to give you an example of something that demonstrates aroused this. And that is when we were, I have friends over to watch the election in 2016. I had the champagne chilling in the refrigerator for the first female president of the United States. Now, you may see a little bias here politically. Sorry. So we're all sitting there, and when it became inevitable that Donald Trump was going to win, it was amazing to watch what happened in the room. I went dead. I went completely numb. I couldn't even talk. My sweet blue wife was screaming and cursing like a sailor. And we had one person in the room who's a journalist. I won't say her name because you probably all know her. But she was there in the room with us, and she went blue. Oh, it'll be okay. We'll figure out. There'll be tests. It was really interesting how we reacted when we got triggered. Okay, so this begs the question: how do we move from imbalance to balance? And it's a tool that I call working the triangle. And the best way for me to tell you about that or describe what that is to tell you a story. Many years ago, as a young, new organizational consultant, most of my work was with measly $5 or $6, $10 million companies. I got one that was a multi-million dollar company, and I thought a little bit over my head. So I heard about this woman, and I asked her to join me. We'll call her Terry, short for Terry Bull. And she was a red. She was ferociously red. She was the lioness. And so when we would go to talk about the client and what were I would go in with all my ideas and my perspective and my opinions, and I would leave every session with her ideas, her perspective, and her opinions. And then either a few hours later, and sometimes even a few days later, I would wake up and go, what the heck just happened? What happened to all my ideas? I went in with my ideas, I came out with hers. What happened? Well, this is what happened. I went in, and because of the dynamic between the two of us, I went lopsided blue. And that was converging. That was merging. I adopted her head. That was it freeze and appease? I went into an appease mode. And I just completely adopted what she was thinking. Now, here is the one thing that I want to tell you. If you don't remember one thing about what I said today, this is the one thing I'd like you to remember. It's not what you're doing that's negative. It's what you're not doing that's positive. It's not what you're doing that's imbalanced that's the issue. It's what you're not doing that would be positive. So here I was. I was so caught up in her. What wasn't I not doing? What wasn't I doing? Knowing and thinking for myself and then speaking up for it. So what I did, I knew this was an amygdala thing. I knew this was an aroused reaction. So I had to go in intentionally. I had to stop and think about what I really want. I literally wrote it down and brought the sheet of paper with me for our next meeting. And then I insisted. I told myself, Sam, you do not leave that room unless you say those things until she hears you. So we went in, and I probably had to say it 3 or 4 times, and then it finally broke through. And guess what happened? She fired me. No, she didn't. We had the best conversation, the most constructive conversation we probably ever had. Why? Because when I brought the other elements that I was out of balance with into balance, I went into the sweet spot. And then we had a really, really constructive conversation. So, in conclusion, I just want to talk a little bit about how this might apply to you. How are we doing for time? Good. Hey, how you like that, man? I am great. Oh, did you say I was great? Oh. Was that red of me to think that? Never mind, I'll shut up. Non-aroused imbalance. I invite you to go and take the little test that I have on there and the context in which, because it is contextual. I am different with my wife than I am when I get around alpha males or alpha females. Like that alpha female, I went blue. I went blue. With my wife, because she's so blue, I go red with her. So we are different in different situations. No, but take the test and say, where do I have to develop as a leader? What of the three do I need to focus on? When I was a new therapist, I was so freaking blue, it was scary. And it was awful, and I didn't keep any clients. I didn't help any, and I learned how to integrate red into my therapy. And all of a sudden, clients are staying with me. We're progressing. We're going deep. Oh, sweet spot. So figure out where if you don't know, ask your spouse. Yes, that's what you do. Or you take the ITI. The ITI is easier. And then just be mindful of what happens to you when you get triggered. Do you shut down? Do you get angry? Do you become appeasing and peace at any price? And then be intentional next time you go into that situation. I call that strategic balancing, because usually you can't do it when it's happening, because the limbic system works a lot faster than the cortex does. That was by design, so we duck when tigers jump at us. And then the other thing is about your team and your company. I have a talk I give, because one of the things I love to do is selection. I think it's one of the most important things I can do as a consultant, is helping companies hire the right people. And I call it hire, inspire, and retire. And try to think about emotional intelligence when you're hiring someone. Here's the problem. Emotional intelligence is really hard to assess. Because why? When someone's interviewing you, are they going to lose their temper? Are they going to check out? Are they going to become pat? No. People are going to be on their best behavior. So it's really hard, but there are certain things you can do. I have come across 2 assessments that I use now that gets past all that stuff, and it goes right to some of those things, because it's not a choice test, it's a sorting test. And all the research is done, and it'll show people their emotional intelligence in ways you can't get by a self-report. Inspire, develop people. Look at your main staff and say, what areas do they need to develop? They need to be more red? Do they need to be more blue? Maybe they need to be more yellow. And help them develop that. And then you'll see an incredible difference when they can start applying those. And the other is retire. People who are not emotionally intelligent, this is tragic, actually. The less emotionally intelligent you are, the less likely you're ever going to be more emotionally intelligent. It's kind of sad, because the resources you need to be emotionally intelligent have to do with being emotionally intelligent. So sometimes you have to let people go. And some of the biggest problems I've seen are people who keep people who are smart in what they do, but they drive everyone crazy. What's the number one reason why people leave a company? Anybody know? Their boss. And if you have really good people who are leaving because the boss, you may want to have the boss leave. Or find them another place where they don't have anything to do with people, where they're safe, right? But probably one of the more important things, and I'll conclude with this, is because so many people in this room are starting companies, are incubators, or have you can have an effect on the culture of a company that you can't have. I work for Applied Materials. You know who they are? They make your phones and everything. It's really hard to change that culture. But if you only have 8 employees, you can change that culture by being an emotionally intelligent leader. A company where people are free to say what they think, respect each other, and really are careful about how they act. So, all right. So here's, by the way, the link. If you want to either get that relationship circled graphic, or if you want to take the thing, you also can. I forgot to bring books today. How do you like that? Anyway, thank you.
Amazing presentation. Thank you. Come back up. So I'm going to hand the microphone off to Michael here to answer some Q&A. If you have a question, we'd love to hear it. If you have a story about your emotional intelligence or the employee that fired you or why you left, we're not looking for that. What we want to do is have questions that Dr. Sam can answer.
And if no one has a question, I will answer Mike's question.
I have a question. Quick question. You mentioned it's about...
Is it on? Okay, there you go.
You mentioned that it's about...
Who's talking?
Over here.
Okay.
You mentioned that it's about not doing less of what you're not doing well, but doing more of what you can do positively.
Yes.
That sounds like the appreciative inquiry theory. Is that kind of like what you're talking about?
You know what? I know a little bit about AI, and I would guess that's probably true, which I came up with the idea first. There you go. Did you hear that? Can you give them the mic back? Because that's really important for people to hear.
It's a theory called appreciative inquiry posits that if you do more things that you're good at and more things that are positive, then necessarily you'll have less time to do things that are negative or that you're weak at, and so you'll grow that way.
And then you get natural positive feedback, which then conditions the brain to the new behavior. Yes. Yes.
So using the triangle or the circle and everything that you kind of explained today, are there any tips or tricks to help change the people that you are working for without them maybe knowing that you're tricking them into being an actual good person or good leader?
Thank you for your question. Next. That's a very challenging question. It gets at how much can we change our emotional intelligence. And the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more you can change it, and the less emotionally intelligent you are. So the harder is to change emotional intelligence, and that's the tragedy I just said. With that being said, if you, again, this is one model. There's many different models. The reason I like this model over Goldman's, because Goldman's is brilliant. He saved, I don't know what he did something very important. And can you hear me? Is it coming across? So if you think about it, and let's say, do you have an example of one of your employees, or that they have an imbalance in what way?
Well, I'm working with people above me.
Oh God, managing up line.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Is there any tip or trick or communication skill that you can use so that the people who don't have the emotional intelligence or the empathy or the social skills or any of the positive attributes that you wish that your leader would have?
You just tell them, if you're not more empathic, I'm going to fire you. You're out of here. Yeah. That's the problem, right? And the more narcissistic they are, the more hurt they're going to get, and you can get retaliation. This is what I say. It's tread with carefulness, because there's certain places where one of my phrases, you positive, they're negative. So if they're a negative red, you positive, they're red. So they're kind of a bully, and then you set a boundary. You say, you can't talk to me like that. Here's the problem. That's my using positive red against their negative red. Here's the problem with that. They could fire you. At home, you could do that. Downline, you can do it, but it's a little bit more tricky. I think I do a course on called Managing Difficult People. And the premise is this. The first three principles of managing your difficult people. The first principle of managing difficult people is manage yourself first. The second principle is manage yourself first. And the third principle is manage yourself first. So you have to be careful that when they trigger you, you come in not triggered. And so if you can try to maintain your own sweet spot, you can dynamically interface with that person, and they might change. They might. If they're red and you tend to get blue, they're going to abuse you more. But if you have a healthy red saying, wait a minute, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you give me a specific example? Or I really want to make this happen, but you've got to, they might switch. I see that happen a lot. So at least you can do that. And really, in that case, you have to really be self-aware. Number one thing, awareness. Awareness is everything. I talk to people about, I call it intentional, aware and intentional. Be conscious and intentional. So if you're aware of how you react to that person, and you can beforehand try to bring that balance into that, you might change the dynamic a little bit. And then when you get an anonymous survey, you tell them the truth. Anyone else? Yes.
Yes. Hi. I was taking a self-development forum, and the forum leader, when she started to talk, she said, I hate sensitive people, the ones that they are getting upset so fast. Can you explain a little bit about it? Thank you.
Of course. I want to know which sensitive people they're talking about. Are they talking about this sensitive people or this sensitive people? Because I hate this sensitive people too. They drive me nuts. Right? They're overly dependent. They are passive aggressive. They don't ever tell you what they really think. Right? So is it overly sensitive here that they get hurt real easy? Or is it this type of person? But often, and I can say this because I don't know this person, very often that's their anxiety, is their own sensitivity. And so when they see it in someone else, they hate it. So there's a good chance, it's called projection, right? And they have a really hard time with their own vulnerability, their own need for other people, the fact that they don't know everything or that things can affect them, and so when they see it in someone else, they will attack it and not like it. So it really depends. If it's this, then that person maybe wants to work on maybe being more red or more yellow or whatever they need to be. Anybody else? Yes.
Morning, Sam.
David.
How are you?
I'm well. Good to see you, buddy.
Sam, when you were my therapist 25 years ago, you said something to me that just rocked my world, but I've been able to share that for the last 25 years. You said if someone flips you off while you're driving, that it shouldn't affect me in any way. Can you explain that?
No longer. I don't agree with that anymore. You chase them down and you go real close to their bumper. The D word, but we said the N word, right? The D word, differentiation. And that's a yellow thing. It's ability to kind of differentiate yourself emotionally from the other person's story and behavior. So it minimally affects you. That's where the blue would come in, or the red. Either one of those can be offended for different reasons. But the yellow is the part of us that could step back and say, someone just flipped me off. Did I do something wrong? Okay, I'm sorry. If I didn't, that person's having a bad day. Now, where was I? Mm-hmm. And differentiation is a really good capacity to have because you won't be so reactive or miserable. Now, try it at home. That's where the real challenge of being differentiated is. Do we have time for more?
So one of the challenges I face a lot is, talking to like an investor or is kind of finance. That's, as an entrepreneur, I need to present myself as very, confident and strong, and and that culture. There's kind of that bro culture, or I would say it's kind of a macho culture of not showing any kind of weakness or not. Basically, where this kind of work is looked down on, and I don't know the question. It's like how, other than saying I want something different for my company, I feel like I just have to go into that culture and play that part.
Yes, I'm not sure if I'm going to scratch where it itches, but you'll let me know if not. And that is, don't tell them. Don't tell them that you're using empathy, or don't tell them that you're really tuned into where they are, or that you can actually control yourself. And so you go into meetings, probably needing to show that. Remember, I said it's based on the context. Remember, I had a little comma in one of the previous slides. It's based on the context. If you're a negotiator, if you want to go in and be in your sweet spot, but you lead with what color, do you think, if you're a negotiator going into a negotiation?
Yellow.
I heard yellow and red. And probably orange is the right thing to do. Predominantly red. Why? Because you want to get your way or your client's way. But I'll tell you, if you're not tuned into where they are, or you're not willing to give something up, or you can't control yourself and hold a complexity and be patient, then that. So you may have to go in those meetings and be more red than maybe you're even comfortable being. But knowing that you're going to be employing these as well, and they're not going to sense that you're a empathic person, because if they have a fear of that, they're going to be, if they sense it in you, they're going to be reactive because it scares them. I see that all the time. So you lead with red, but you employ these guys because you'll be way more effective. And they might feel heard even. right? Because people like to be heard, right? So that's kind of what I would say. And then build your company with the culture that you think is the best culture that you can build.
Questions? Anyone? One sec.
So thanks for the advice about managing yourself, the 3 rules. But I was curious, when there's toxic groups, how do you go about that? Is it still just managing yourself?
This group's not toxic.
As a team.
What do you mean by toxic?
Just when people are toxic together, and then it starts building and.
That depends, of course. The most helpful thing would be for you to tell me an actual example, and we could talk about it, because there's power dynamics. How much leverage do you have in that group? If you're the leader, is very different than you're a member, versus you're the recipient of whether that group functions well or not. So there's a lot of different pieces to that.
I guess like in the working environment, like a lot of complaining and just...
When I work with companies and I work with teams, I will always do interviews with every one of the team members and tell them anything they tell me is anonymous, confidential, and I'll blend it together thematically, and then I give feedback that person probably never gets, because it starts with the leader. So whoever's the leader of that group is going to be the person who's going to be the most responsible for the level of health or toxicity. And if the leader is not going to be able to do that, then I don't know what can be done.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I feel like some of the people are sort of nibbling around what I would call the serenity prayer, right? That if you've got an example of what to do when you feel like you can change things. Go to these different quadrants, and people are asking about their boss and going upward. So how would you say, that knowing what to do when you can do something, which is what you've been talking about this morning,
except when you can't, and
how to know when you can't. How do you know when you can't, or steps of knowing when you can't? It's time to leave a toxic group or a toxic employment situation.
These are good questions. There's no teacher as good as awareness combined with experience. So it's the 10,000 hours. After a while, you hopefully build wisdom, and wisdom's going to be a yellow thing. It's a knowing thing. It's a mindfulness thing. Trial and error. The old new phrase, right? Not the old phrase. The new phrase: fail fast. I have a phrase: find out rather than figure out. Put yourself out there and see what happens. And if you get some blowback that's negative, you go, tread with caution. So I think that it's a very difficult thing, but eventually you want to be able to have the wisdom and then have the courage to make the decision if you have to make a tough one, which might be leave it. Rather than, it might be unhealthy to do a negative blue, for example, and just kind of become part of that group and become part of the toxicity. Am I answering your question? Yeah. Ask it again. I have a feeling I wasn't.
It was...
My immediately blue was saying, I think I'm missing you. So ask it again.
I think maybe you tipped your hand by saying 10,000 hours. That's how you know is a lot of experience. Yeah. And you kind of can't tell me when to know. I have to be in my kind of environments to know.
But not passive experience, if that's even a contradiction. There may be no such thing as passive experience. It's an experience where you learn things from it, and you become mindful of things. And then eventually you know that this person can't be trusted, or this person can be trusted.
One sec.
Thank you for a really enlightening talk, and thank you for bringing up regulating oneself, like in an environment. On occasion, I deal with a lot of people who have the innate inability to self-regulate. Sometimes on a daily or an hourly basis. But that's just the way some people are just that way. What I struggle is I try to make sure that I self-regulate before I get into that environment, before I am in front of people who have the innate inability to self-regulate. Do you have any suggestions for doing that or in preparation before you step into an environment like that?
I have more applause than I have suggestions. I think it's that manage yourself first thing. That the folks who generally don't have that ability to regulate themselves have they actually can measure this now. They have a smaller prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the executive function of the brain. And through many different reasons, genetics or poor attachment when you're young, and other things, to certain kind of hormones like serotonin or dopamine don't get properly regulated, that part of the brain doesn't grow, and they have really tough time with impulse control. They often are very addictive, or they can have problems with addiction, self-regulation issue. And the thing is, you go in as calm as you can be, and your calm presence can dynamically mediate that, hopefully. A lot of times, people like that will calm down around a calm person. But if you start getting really agitated or impatient, or you start becoming really passive around them, they might get agitated. So you said the exact thing, is go in as calm and peacefully as you can, and stay in that gap. Stay in that space. I call it, what's it called when you're in the pocket? Yeah, in football, right? It's like stay in the pocket, even though there's a 350-pound tackle coming after you. You try to stay in that emotional space and start to stay as calm as you can. And when you can stay calm, then you're more likely to be able to do the other two. If you need to listen or you need to set a boundary. Good question.
Anyone else? Question?
Yeah, recently I had a lot of conflicts, and my best friend gave me advice. She said that there are two extreme type of leader. One extreme is asshole. Another extreme is douchebag. And your personality is more towards douchebag. So you need to be more asshole. So is that advice similar to the chart?
I want you to go to work tomorrow and tell everything wrong with everybody. That your hair looks like crap. You're fat. Be an asshole tomorrow. There, that's a bumper sticker. Be an asshole today. It's what I call confounding, right? Is when we have a hard time with one or any of the dimensions, we usually have what I call confounding. We confuse positive red with negative red. So you probably, like all of us, think if you become red, you'll be an asshole. But this over here is not asshole. This is muscles. This is strength. This is agency. Ever hear that word? I love that word. Personal agency. So you can go in and be an asshole, or you can work on being more confrontive, setting better boundaries, saying no to people, asking people if someone doesn't deliver, you talk to them about not delivering. And when you do that, you'll find that these things will come more into balance. And so you won't be so douchebaggy.
I've been doing this since 2016, and that's the best question I've ever heard.
You know what? That was really a good question.
We done, Mike? Oh, one last question, I guess.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. It's really amazing. You said, just in passing recently, find out rather than figure out. And I would love to hear a bit more about taking action as opposed to, let's say, you know the chart. I see the chart, I know the elements. There are different ways we can take action. So I'd love it if you could speak to that a bit, knowledge versus action, and then also if there was one or two things you think, hey, just practice this over and over from this talk.
And what you would practice is unique to everybody. Not unique, but there'll be certain things that are different for everybody. Some people are going to have to practice being positive red, right? Some of us are going to have to take the 10 count. I will tell people I say, don't send the email till the next morning, till your brain settles down. If you don't need to get it right. So there's things you can practice. And some of them are very, very... The one I didn't talk about, Miguel. Miguel he would throw temper tantrums. He owned the company, and he would throw temper tantrums. And we had to help him do this more. And And so I would literally say during meetings, you can't talk. You have every time you want to talk, you have to put 5 marks down, and then you can talk. So we have to maybe do things like that. And sometimes it's helpful to talk to someone else because it's hard to think about ourselves inside the box. What was the question again? What is
the question was to speak a bit to finding out versus figuring out.
Yeah, let me talk about that. It depends. If you're a red, you may need to back off. But folks who tend to be more cautious, afraid, or detached, I work with a high-tech company, and there's a lot of people there who are high on scores on cautiousness in the Hogan. And we're trying to help them to fail fast, to speak up in meetings. So for those folks, it's to encourage them to whatever they figure out they need to do, and maybe even think about it beforehand, and then intentionally do it in the setting where they're not likely to do it, which might be ask a question. Ask a clarification question. Some people will sit there a whole meeting and not know what's going on, but they won't ask the question. So it depends. It's up to the individual what they need to practice, and then practice it.